Number 1. Pointless Dutch angles. When I was a beginner photographer, I thought it was cool to tilt everything off to the side, and now looking back, I can see that I've completely ruined perfectly good photos of this escalator, for example, this airport. Dutch angles are supposed to represent chaos in filmmaking or cinematography, but when done like this, it's it's completely ridiculous. Here's another shot I took. I just couldn't help myself. I had an interesting scene. There were some golf balls. There was a city in the background, and I just had to tilt the horizon. I don't know why. Just a simple fix these days, and the photo already looks so much better. HDR Overload. I don't know if you guys remember this, but in the early to mid 2000s, we had photos that looked like this, where people just discovered high dynamic range for the first time. Clarity sliders were pushed up, and so we got this mishmash of colors. I've got a perfectly good picture. HDR. There you go. I bet the one on the right would get me more likes on Instagram, but once you start looking at it, I mean, it's just it's just ridiculous. Number 3, split toning. This is kind of the HDR of the 2010s, and I, just like everyone else, succumbed to its temptations. An example of split toning is when we mess with the hue saturation sliders for the highlights and shadows. We make the shadows teal and the highlights purple, or the other way around, and we achieve a cool Blade Runner-ish synthwave look that has only been done 1 million times before, and will continue to be done 1 million times in the future. Split toning doesn't have to be teal and purple, but it often is. So you would think we would have moved on by now, but no, there's a new technique in town, and it's called crunchy blacks. It's called lifting the shadows to create this kind of low contrast look, where the darks are never really dark. There is no true black in the photo anywhere. HDR of the 2020s. Here we have HDR, split toning, and the lifting of the shadows all in one picture. Absolutely ludicrous. Number 4, long exposure. Yes, when you first discover that your camera can do long exposure, you start making long exposures of everything. And this led to me standing in the middle of roads, taking pictures of light trails from buses. Here's one of a Zippo lighter, long exposure with fire, very fun. And finally, this is an image where I think long exposure played in my favor. Putting aside the obvious glaring bright spots in the image, when you first discover shallow depth of field and you buy your first 1.8 aperture prime lens, what do you get? You get portraits of cats that are like this, where the whiskers and the eyes are in focus and exactly nothing else is. I was asked to take pictures of this engineering component, and I was so enthralled with the low depth of field, I didn't even get the whole thing in focus. And when you have a lens, a fast lens like this, it's easy to forget what's in the background, because you think, oh, you're just going to blur away the whole background. But you can still mess up backgrounds, as I've done here. And so we have a very busy background that just distracts from the subject, and all I've achieved is, well, I've taken a shot at 1.8. Some people never get out of this phase, and they go deeper into a phase that I call the bokeh phase, where it's not just about depth of field, but it's evaluating out of focus areas, learning Japanese words, comparing the out of focus circles to onions or apples and calling them creamy or dreamy or whatever. With that said, photography is a hobby. Do with it what you will. Extreme wide angle. Yes, when I got my first wide angle lens, I shot everything at 16mm equivalent on my crop sensor camera. Now later I justified this picture by saying I wanted to juxtapose the size of the dark opening versus the light of the church and blah blah blah. It ended up just being a pretty bad architecture photo. You see, when you're a beginner, you're amazed at what you can do at the extremes, and you start taking super wide shots. I also tilted the angle, so there are actually 2 mistakes in one here for a bonus. Pointing and shooting. When you first start photography, you just start clicking everywhere, because it's digital, it's free. Another shot doesn't cost anything. That leads to photos like this. There's no obvious subject here. The exposure is kind of flat. You can't tell what's important, what isn't important. It's quite possible that nothing's important. I mean, it's just a snapshot. It can be done with my phone. It's best to pre-visualize the shot that you want before just snapping away. Doesn't matter if the shot is free, otherwise you get pictures like this of a propeller in a museum with a busy background that does no justice to either the background or the propeller and is a complete waste of hard drive space. Here was me pointing and shooting, actually at a very interesting location in Cappadocia in Turkey. But what happens when you slow down a bit, pre-visualize, anticipate, and take the picture? You get a far more interesting shot like this, where I got two of the tourists in my tour group. Both of them were taking photos. Slow down, pre-visualize, anticipate. Aspect ratio as a crutch. When I first discovered that I had other aspect ratios on my camera, I went wild. This led to ridiculous photos like this, 1x1 shot of a cactus, which is completely the inappropriate framing for it because you don't even get the whole cactus in the scene. I thought, hey, it's a square concept, it's a Hasselblad type look, it's just gonna look cool. Well, it doesn't look cool. Istanbul, looking over the Blue Mosque, and I thought it's gonna be like I'm Vivian Maier documenting life in Istanbul. No, you still have to have an interesting picture. You can't see their faces, you can't really tell what's going on. I mean, you could say it could symbolize hope or something abstract like that, but the angle was all wrong, and my position was all wrong, and it ended up just not being a very good photo. Here I was so captivated by this Turkish delight factory that I didn't even realize I was taking a square image and leaving no breathing room for the guy at the left. Is he the subject? Is the pastry the subject? Not quite clear. A few things wrong here. Another aspect ratio I abused when I discovered it was the 16:9 cinematic look. I thought, oh, okay, just shoot 16:9, everything looks cinematic, everything will be like a still out of a movie. Well, yeah, not quite either. Oh, here I thought 16:9 and the very interesting green tones. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way because the photo didn't have any interesting subjects. 16:9 didn't save the picture. Now, occasionally you make good use of the cinematic format. And here in the salt flats of Bolivia, I got a shot I was pretty happy with. And the square format can be quite good too, especially for taking pictures of food. You know, when you want to emphasize the subject in the middle, usually when you're taking pictures of food, it's all about what's on the plate in the middle. And the square format lends itself very well. Lame street photography. This one might be a bit controversial, but when I was a beginner, I was just scared of doing street photography, and I didn't really get close to anything. And so I ended up with shots like this, ill-composed, simultaneously voyeuristic and boring. This is what happens when you don't get close. This is what happens when you just try to document what's going on. You don't get very interesting pictures at all. Here we have one of my worst shots of all time. Street corner in San Francisco, guy carrying some baguettes. We can't really see the guy. We can barely see the baguettes. I think the horizon's not even level. It's just a point and shoot picture of this scene. Would have been much more interesting had I gone in front of him, anticipated the shot. But no, I messed it up. I wasn't getting close enough. So in Hong Kong I started getting closer. You see expressions, you see more detail. It's a much more intimate look. The viewer feels like they're there and they're part of the scene. And finally, when you get close enough, you start actually interacting with your subjects. They were pretty cool with the whole street photography concept. They wanted their dogs in the picture. You gotta get close. Finally, number 10, let's make it black and white. Just change a picture from color to black and white, and suddenly it becomes cool and artistic, right? Well, not really. If there's no reason to make the photo black and white, you probably shouldn't make it black and white. California Republic flag is a very colorful one. And yet I made this black and white just because I could. I don't know why. No good reason at all. This was a very interesting rock formation, and it was actually colored bright Martian red. And I thought, you know what? I'm Ansel Adams today. Let's take a black and white picture and it's going to come out interesting. No, it just looks like another random regular rock. When you shoot black and white, it doesn't quite fix the exposure issues. Highlights were clipped, detail was lost in the shadows. It just wasn't a very good picture. But I thought, oh, black and white will save it. Black and white didn't save it. So here, finally, I think I made appropriate use of black and white. I wanted to show the passage of time, and I didn't want you to get distracted by all the bright, colorful backpacks that people had. So again, I think this was an appropriate use of black and white. If you like this video, subscribe for more videos like this. Otherwise, let me know in the comment section whether you had any photography phases that you went through. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.